Spiritual awake people quit these things slowly. Carl Jung. What if I told you that the most spiritually awakened people in the world didn't achieve their wisdom by adding more to their lives, but by slowly, deliberately letting go? Carl Jung, the revolutionary psychologist who gave us concepts like the collective, unconscious, and psychological types, made a profound observation. True spiritual awakening isn't about dramatic revelations or instant transformations. It's about the gradual, often painful process of releasing what no longer serves us. Today, we're diving deep into the 12 things that spiritually awakened people quit, slowly, not because they lack willpower, but because Jung understood something most of us miss. Lasting transformation happens in layers, like an onion being peeled away, one layer at a time. I'm your name. And if you're someone who's felt that pull towards something deeper, something more meaningful in your life, then this video is for you. We'll explore not just what these awakened individuals let go of, but why the process is gradual and how you can begin your own journey of conscious release. But first, let me ask you this. Have you ever noticed that the most profound changes in your life didn't happen overnight? Drop a comment below with one thing you've slowly let go of that transformed your life. I read every comment and often feature insights in future videos. And if this resonates with you, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell because we're building a community of conscious individuals here, and your journey matters. Section 1. The Psychology of Gradual Transformation. Before we dive into the specific things spiritually awakened people quit, we need to understand why this process is gradual. Jung didn't believe in quick fixes or overnight enlightenment. He understood something profound about human psychology. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But notice he didn't say instantly become or suddenly realize. He understood that authentic transformation requires what he called individuation, the psychological process of integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of the mind. Think about it this way. Imagine you've been wearing a heavy backpack your entire life. You've grown so accustomed to its weight that you don't even notice it anymore. Your muscles have adapted, your posture has changed, your entire way of moving through the world has been shaped by this invisible burden. Now, what happens if someone suddenly rips that backpack away? You don't feel free. You feel unbalanced, disoriented, maybe even fall backward. Your body doesn't know how to move without that familiar weight. This is exactly why spiritual awakening is gradual. The ego structures, the patterns, the beliefs that have defined us aren't just ideas, they're psychological muscles we've developed over decades. Releasing them too quickly would leave us psychologically unbalanced. Jung observed that people who tried to force rapid spiritual transformation often experienced what he called inflation, where the ego becomes identified with spiritual experiences, actually moving them further from genuine awakening. The truly awakened individuals Jung studied had one thing in common: patience with themselves. They understood that each release was like a small death, the death of who they thought they were. And rebirth takes time. So as we explore these 12 things, remember, this isn't a checklist to rush through. It's a map of a journey that might take years, even decades. And that's not a flaw in the process. That is the process. Section 2. The need for external validation. The first thing, spiritually awaken people slowly. Quit is the desperate need for external validation. Notice I said desperate need, not the natural human desire for connection and appreciation, but that anxious, all-consuming hunger for others' approval. Let me share a story that perfectly illustrates this. I once knew a successful business executive. Let's call her Sarah. She had everything society told her would make her happy. Corner office, six-figure salary, designer clothes. But Sarah spent her days refreshing LinkedIn to see how many people liked her posts, checking her phone compulsively for text responses, and feeling physically sick when meetings didn't go perfectly. Sarah's awakening didn't begin with meditation or spiritual books. It began when she got promoted to a position she'd wanted for years and felt absolutely nothing. That moment of emptiness forced her to confront a terrifying question. Who am I when no one is watching or approving? The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For Sarah, and for many of us, accepting ourselves means releasing the addictive drug of external approval. But here's why this process is gradual. Our need for validation often develops as a survival mechanism. Maybe as children, we learned that love was conditional on performance. Maybe we grew up in environments where approval meant safety. Awakened individuals don't simply decide one day to stop caring what others think. Instead, they begin to notice the cost of constantly seeking approval, the exhaustion of performing instead of being authentic, the anxiety of never knowing if you're enough, the lost opportunities because you chose safety over truth, the relationships built on false versions of yourself. The gradual release looks like this. First, you start noticing when you're people-pleasing. Then you begin small experiments in authenticity, maybe sharing an unpopular opinion or saying no to a request. Each time you act from your center rather than for approval, you strengthen what Jung called your authentic self. Sarah's transformation took 3 years. 3 years of slowly learning to trust her inner compass over external praise. Today, she runs a small nonprofit, makes half her previous salary, and describes herself as the happiest she's ever been. The key insight? You can't go from external validation to self-validation overnight because you first need to discover what self even means. That discovery is the journey itself. Section 3. The illusion of control. The second thing spiritually awakened people slowly release is the illusion of control. And I emphasize illusion because Jung understood that our sense of control is largely a psychological construct that helps us feel safe in an uncertain world. But here's a question that might shake you. What if the very thing you think is protecting you is actually imprecising you? Consider Michael, a project manager who prided himself on having everything perfectly planned. He had backup plans for his backup plans, controlled every detail of his environment, and experienced genuine anxiety when anything deviated from his expectations. Michael's awakening began during a family vacation. That was supposed to be perfectly orchestrated. Flight delays led to missed connections, which led to hotel booking errors, which led to restaurant closures. By day 3, Michael was having a panic attack in a foreign city where nothing was going according to plan. But something interesting happened. His teenage daughter, who had been sullen and withdrawn for months, suddenly came alive during the chaos. She started talking to locals, discovered hidden gems off the beaten path, and for the first time in years, she and Michael had genuine conversations. That trip became a turning point. Michael realized his need for control wasn't protecting his family, it was preventing them from experiencing life's spontaneous gifts. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the transcendent function, our ability to hold the tension between opposing forces without rushing to resolve them. For control-oriented people, this means learning to sit with uncertainty without immediately trying to manage or fix it. The gradual release of control happens in stages. Stage 1, recognition. You start noticing how much energy you spend trying to control outcomes, other people, or even your own emotions. Stage 2, small experiments. You begin allowing minor uncertainties. Maybe you take a different route to work or order something new at a restaurant. Stage 3, bigger releases. You start delegating more, saying, I don't know when you don't, and accepting that some outcomes are beyond your influence. Stage 4, flow states. You begin experiencing moments where effort and ease combine, where things unfold naturally without your constant management. But why is this process gradual? Because control often develops from trauma or early experiences of powerlessness. The person who micromanages might have grown up in chaos. The one who overprepares might have experienced devastating surprises. Jung understood that releasing control isn't about becoming passive or irresponsible. It's about distinguishing between what's truly within our influence and what isn't. Awakened. Individuals learn what the Stoics called the dichotomy of control. They put their energy into their responses, their choices, their inner state, while releasing attachment to outcomes they cannot guarantee. Michael's transformation took 2 years. Today, he describes his work style as intentional flexibility. He still plans and prepares, but he holds those plans lightly, ready to adapt when life presents different possibilities. Section 4. Toxic relationships and people-pleasing patterns. The third thing spiritually awakened, people slowly quit, is toxic relationships and the people-pleasing patterns that often maintain them. But here's what makes this particularly challenging. These relationships often feel normal because they've been our normal for so long. I want you to imagine your energy as a bank account. Every interaction either makes a deposit or a withdrawal. Toxic relationships are those that consistently overdraw your account, leaving you emotionally bankrupt while wondering why you feel so empty. Jung had a term for this: psychological vampirism. Not because people are intentionally evil, but because some relationship dynamics literally drain life force from one person and feed it to another. Let me tell you about Lisa, a nurse who came to realize that her 20-year friendship with her college roommate was slowly destroying her peace of mind. Every phone call with Maria followed the same pattern. Maria would call in crisis. Lisa would drop everything to provide emotional support. Maria would feel better and disappear until the next crisis. Lisa never called Maria with her own problems because Maria has so much going on. Lisa's awakening came during a particularly difficult period when her mother was diagnosed with cancer. Maria called that same week with her usual drama, a dating situation that was frustrating, but not serious. Lisa found herself comforting Maria while sitting in a hospital waiting room, and something clicked. She realized she had been trained since childhood to believe that her value came from being helpful, available, and selfless. But Jung's work taught her to ask a revolutionary question. What if selflessness without boundaries isn't virtue? It's self-abandonment. Jung identified several psychological patterns that keep us trapped in toxic dynamics. The savior complex. We feel responsible for fixing others' problems, which actually prevents them from developing their own strength. The approval addiction. We tolerate mistreatment because we'd rather be wanted, even unhealthily, than risk being alone. The guilt trap. We've been conditioned to believe that setting boundaries is selfish, when in reality, boundaries are essential for authentic relationship. Shadow projection. We stay in toxic relationships because they allow us to avoid confronting uncomfortable aspects of ourselves. The gradual release of toxic relationships happens through what Jung called ethical development. Phase 1. Awareness. You start recognizing patterns. Maybe you notice you feel drained after certain interactions, or you realize you're always giving but rarely receiving. Phase 2. Internal work. This is crucial. You explore why you've been drawn to or tolerant of these dynamics. Often there are childhood wounds or limiting beliefs underneath. Phase 3. Boundary experiments. You start small. Maybe you don't immediately respond to manipulative texts, or you limit certain conversations to specific time frames. Phase 4. Conscious choosing. You begin making deliberate decisions about who gets your energy, rather than operating from obligation or habit. Phase 5. Attraction shift. As you heal, you naturally attract healthier relationships and become less compatible with toxic dynamics. But here's why this process is gradual and why it can't be rushed. Toxic relationships often fulfill unconscious psychological needs. The person who always rescues others might be avoiding their own problems. The one who tolerates mistreatment might be replaying familiar childhood dynamics. Jung emphasized that we can't simply cut people off without doing the inner work, because we'll just recreate the same patterns with new people. Lisa's transformation took 4 years. She gradually reduced contact with Maria, went to therapy to understand her caretaking patterns, and slowly built relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. The friendship with Maria eventually ended, but Lisa gained something far more valuable. She learned to be in relationship with herself first, which made all her other relationships healthier. Section 5. The pursuit of material possessions for happiness. The fourth thing spiritually awakened people slowly quit is the pursuit of material possessions as a source of happiness. But let's be clear from the start. This isn't about taking a vow of poverty or judging anyone who enjoys nice things. This is about recognizing when we're using stuff to fill spiritual voids. Here's a sobering reality. Americans today own more possessions than royalty did 200 years ago, yet rates of anxiety and depression have skyrocketed. Jung would have found this fascinating but not surprising. He understood that the outer world often reflects our inner state. Let me share David's story. David was a successful real estate developer who owned 3 homes, 5 cars, and enough gadgets to stock a small electronics store. He worked 80-hour weeks to afford his lifestyle and felt proud of his ability to buy whatever he wanted. David's awakening came in the most unexpected way. During a business trip, his flight was diverted due to weather, and he found himself stranded in a small mountain town with nothing but his carry-on bag. No Wi-Fi, no shopping centers, no distractions. For the first time in years, David was forced to sit with himself without the buffer of acquisition. What he discovered terrified him. He had no idea who he was when he wasn't buying, having, or showing off his possessions. Jung wrote about what he called inflation through identification with objects. He observed that people often try to bolster their sense of self by accumulating things that represent qualities they feel they lack. The expensive watch might represent the success we don't feel we've truly earned. The designer clothes might represent the attractiveness we don't see in ourselves. The sports car might represent the power we feel we lack in our actual lives. But here's the psychological trap. Every purchase provides a temporary hit of dopamine, making us feel better for a brief moment. This creates an addiction cycle where we need increasingly more expensive or impressive purchases. To achieve the same emotional effect, Jung identified several stages in the gradual release from material pursuit. Stage 1. Recognition of the pattern. You start noticing that the excitement of new purchases wears off quickly, leaving you right back where you started emotionally. Stage 2. Questioning the stories. You begin examining the beliefs underneath your purchases. What are you really trying to buy? Status? Security? Love? Identity? Stage 3. Experimentation with enough. You start small experiments. Maybe you pause before purchases and ask, what am I really seeking here? And maybe you try going a month without buying anything non-essential. Stage 4. Discovering true sources of joy. This is where the real transformation happens. You begin finding genuine fulfillment in experiences, relationships, personal growth, and contribution. Stage 5. Conscious consumption. Eventually, you develop the ability to buy things from a place of genuine need or joy rather than from emptiness or compulsion. The key insight Jung offered is the difference between having possessions and being possessed by them. Awakened individuals might own beautiful things, but they hold them lightly. They can appreciate quality and beauty without needing to own them to feel complete. David's transformation took 3 years. He gradually downsized his possessions, discovered that he loved hiking and photography, activities that cost virtually nothing, and found that his relationships deepened when they weren't centered around showing off his latest acquisitions. Today, David lives in one home that he truly loves, owns a single reliable car, and describes himself as richer than he's ever been. Not financially, but spiritually. He still earns well, but now he uses his resources consciously, traveling for experiences rather than things, supporting causes he believes in, and investing in relationships rather than possessions. Section 6. Living in the past or future. The fifth thing spiritually awakened people slowly quit is living in the past or future instead of inhabiting the present moment. Jung called this temporal displacement, the psychological habit of existing anywhere except where we actually are. How many times have you been in a conversation while mentally rehearsing what you'll say next? Or walking through a beautiful place while your mind was replaying yesterday's argument? Or eating a meal while worrying about tomorrow's meeting? Jung observed that most human psychological suffering comes from this temporal displacement. We're depressed about the past or anxious about the future, but we're rarely fully present to experience the only moment we actually have. This one. Consider Rebecca, a marketing executive who lived in a constant state of temporal anxiety. Her mornings were consumed with regret about yesterday's mistakes, her afternoons with worry about next week's presentation, and her evenings with planning for scenarios that might never happen. Rebecca's awakening came during a hiking trip when she realized she had walked for 2 hours through stunning mountain scenery and remembered none of it. Her mind had been completely elsewhere, replaying a difficult conversation with her boss and preparing for a client meeting the following Monday. That moment of recognition shocked her. She was missing her actual life while being mentally busy with things that were either already over or might never happen. Jung understood that living in past or future is often a defense mechanism. The past, even if painful, is known. The future, even if uncertain, gives us the illusion that we can prepare for anything. But the present moment requires something much more challenging: the courage to be vulnerable to what is actually happening right now. He identified several psychological patterns that keep us temporarily displaced: regret and resentment. We replay past events, trying to mentally undo or redo them, which keeps us psychologically stuck in time that no longer exists. Future planning as anxiety management. We obsessively plan and worry about the future as a way to feel in control, but this actually increases our anxiety rather than reducing it. Avoiding present moment. Feelings. Sometimes the past or future feels safer than the emotions we're experiencing right now. Identity based on temporal stories. We define ourselves by our past achievements or failures, or our future goals and fears, rather than who we are in this moment. The gradual awakening to presence happens through what Jung called the discipline of now. Stage 1. Noticing the pattern. You start becoming aware of when your mind is elsewhere. This alone is revolutionary because most people are unconscious of their temporal displacement. Stage 2. Gentle return. When you notice you've drifted into past or future, you gently guide your attention back to the present without judgment. This is like training a puppy. Patience and repetition are key. Stage 3. Sensory anchoring. You develop practices that anchor you in the now, feeling your breath, noticing physical sensations, observing your immediate environment. Stage 4. Emotional presence. This is more advanced. You learn to be present with your current emotions rather than escaping into temporal thinking. Stage 5. Present moment decision-making. Eventually, you develop the ability to make choices based on present moment awareness, rather than past conditioning or future fears. Why is this process gradual? Because presence can feel threatening to the ego. In the present moment, we can't maintain the same illusions about ourselves. We can't hide behind past achievements or future potentials. We have to face who we are right now, which requires tremendous courage. Rebecca's transformation took 2 years of consistent practice. She started with 5-minute meditation sessions and gradually built the capacity for extended present moment awareness. Today, she describes her life as having shifted from watching a movie of her experiences to actually living them. Section 7. The need to be right. The sixth thing spiritually awakened people slowly quit is the need to be right. And this might be the most challenging One, because being right feels so right. But Jung asked a revolutionary question. What if the need to be right is actually a prison that prevents us from learning, growing, and connecting authentically with others? I want to tell you about Thomas, a brilliant lawyer who had built his entire identity around being right. In courtrooms, he was formidable. In relationships, he was exhausting. Thomas could win any argument, cite studies to support his positions, and demolish opposing viewpoints with surgical precision. But Thomas's marriage was falling apart. His teenage son barely spoke to him, and his friendships had dwindled to professional acquaintances who admired his intellect but avoided deep conversations with him. Thomas's awakening came during a family dinner when his 16-year-old daughter said something that shattered his worldview. "Dad, you're always right, but you're never happy, and neither is anyone around you." That night, Thomas lay awake wondering, when did being right become more important than being connected? Jung understood that the need to be right often stems from deeper insecurities. He wrote about what he called the tyranny of the logical mind, the way some people use intellectual superiority as a defense against emotional vulnerability. Think about it. When we're focused on being right, we're not actually listening to understand. We're listening to find flaws in the other person's argument. We're not engaging in genuine dialogue. We're trying to win a contest that the other person might not even know they're participating in. Jung identified several psychological patterns underneath the need to be right. Intellectual superiority as identity. Some people feel valuable only when they can demonstrate superior knowledge or logic. Fear of being wrong. If being wrong feels like being worthless, then being right becomes a survival mechanism. Control through correctness. Being right can feel like a way to control situations and other people's perceptions of us. Avoiding emotional intimacy, intellectual debates, can be a way to avoid the vulnerability of emotional connection. The gradual release from needing to be right happens through what Jung called the wisdom of not knowing. Stage 1, recognition of the cost. You start noticing how the need to be right affects your relationships. You might realize that people avoid certain topics with you or that conversations often become debates. Stage 2, curiosity over correctness. You begin experimenting with asking questions instead of making statements. Instead of "that's wrong because," you try "help me understand your perspective." Stage 3, embracing uncertainty. This is terrifying for people who've built their identity on being right. You start saying "I don't know" or "I might be wrong about this." Stage 4, learning from opposition. You discover that people who disagree with you often have pieces of truth that you've missed. Opposition becomes a gift rather than a threat. Stage 5, relational wisdom. Eventually, you realize that being in right relationship with people is more valuable than being right about facts. Jung wasn't advocating for intellectual passivity or relativism. He distinguished between healthy skepticism and inquiry versus the compulsive need to dominate through correctness. Awakened individuals can still hold strong opinions and engage in vigorous debate, but they hold their positions lightly, enough to be changed by new information or perspectives. Thomas's transformation took 3 years. He started by instituting a no correction rule at family dinners. He wasn't allowed to correct anyone unless it was genuinely important. This was agony at first, but gradually he discovered something beautiful. When he stopped trying to be right, his family started sharing more deeply with him. Today, Thomas is still intellectually rigorous in his work, but in relationships, he's learned to value understanding over being understood, connection over correctness. Section 8, comparison and competitive mindsets. The 7th thing, spiritually awakened. People slowly quit as comparison and competitive mindsets. Jung called this the comparison trap, the psychological habit that turns life into a constant competition where we're always measuring ourselves against others. Here's a truth that might sting. Every moment you spend comparing yourself to others is a moment stolen from developing your own unique gifts. Jung understood that comparison is not just unproductive, it's literally impossible. You're comparing your inner experience, which includes all your doubts, fears, and struggles, to other people's outer presentation, which is carefully curated and edited. Let me share Maria's story. Maria was a talented graphic designer who spent her days creating beautiful work and her evenings scrolling through Instagram, comparing her career to other designers who seemed more successful, more creative, more recognized. Every post from a peer felt like a personal attack on her worth. When someone got featured in a design magazine, Maria felt diminished. When a colleague got promoted, Maria questioned her own abilities. She had turned her creative field into a battlefield, where someone else's success meant her failure. Maria's awakening came during a design conference, where she met one of the Instagram designers she'd been envying. In person, this designer was struggling with imposter syndrome, worried about client acquisition, and dealing with the same creative blocks Maria faced. The perfect Instagram presence was hiding very human struggles. That conversation made Maria realize she had been comparing her behind the scenes reality to everyone else's highlight reel. Jung wrote extensively about what he called individuation, the process of becoming who we uniquely are rather than trying to be better versions of someone else. He understood that comparison prevents individuation because it keeps us focused on external standards rather than internal development. Jung identified several psychological patterns that fuel comparison. Scarcity mindset, the belief that there's not enough success, love, or recognition to go around, so someone else's gain must be our loss. External validation, seeking, using others' achievements as a measurement tool for our own worth. Imposter syndrome, feeling like we don't deserve our successes while assuming others deserve theirs more. Fear of uniqueness. Sometimes we compare ourselves to others because developing our own unique path feels too uncertain or vulnerable. The gradual release from comparison happens through what Jung called the courage of individuation. Stage 1. Awareness of the pattern. You start noticing when you're comparing and how it makes you feel. Most people are unconscious of how much they compare themselves to others. Stage 2. Understanding your triggers. You identify what types of comparisons hit you hardest. Is it professional success, physical appearance, relationships, lifestyle? Stage 3, reframing success. You begin developing your own definition of success, based on your values rather than external achievements. Stage 4, celebrating others without diminishing yourself. This is advanced work. You learn to genuinely celebrate others' successes without feeling threatened or lesser. Stage 5, collaborative mindset. Eventually, you shift from competition to collaboration, recognizing that others' successes can actually enhance your own journey. Jung's most profound insight about comparison was this: when we compare ourselves to others, we're actually avoiding the much more important work of comparing ourselves to who we were yesterday and who we're capable of becoming. The question shifts from, how do I measure up, to how am I growing? This process is gradual because comparison often develops as a childhood survival mechanism. Maybe we learned that we needed to be better than to receive love or attention. Maybe we grew up in environments where comparison was constant. Releasing comparison means developing an entirely new relationship with our own worth, one based on internal rather than external validation. Maria's transformation took 2 years. She gradually reduced her social media consumption, started celebrating her daily improvements, rather than comparing her career to others, and eventually found that her creativity flourished when it wasn't competing with anyone else's. Today, Maria collaborates regularly with designers she once envied, and she's discovered that her unique perspective, the thing she once tried to hide, has become her greatest professional asset. Section 9. Perfectionism and the Fear of Failure. The 8th thing spiritually awakened people slowly quit is perfectionism and the paralyzing fear of failure. Jung understood that perfectionism isn't about having high standards, it's about having impossible standards that prevent us from ever actually living. Here's a paradox that Jung would have loved. The pursuit of perfection actually prevents us from achieving excellence. Why? Because perfectionism is rooted in fear, while excellence is rooted in love. Love for the craft, the process, the growth that comes from doing our best and learning from the results. Let me tell you about James, a brilliant writer who spent 3 years working on his first novel, not because it was a complex epic, but because he couldn't bear to put imperfect words on paper. He would write a paragraph, then delete it, start a chapter, then scrap it. He had notebooks full of outlines for novels that never got written because none of them met his impossible standards. James's awakening came when his mentor, an accomplished author, shared something shocking. Her best-selling novel, the one that launched her career, was not her best work. It was simply the work she had been brave enough to finish and share. "The perfect book you never write," she told James, "helps no one. The imperfect book you complete might change someone's life." Jung wrote about what he called the perfection complex, the psychological pattern where we demand flawless performance from ourselves while accepting human imperfection in others. He understood that perfectionism is actually a form of self-rejection. Think about it. When we demand perfection from ourselves, we're essentially saying that who we are right now, with our current skills and limitations, is not acceptable. We're rejecting our own humanity. Jung identified several psychological roots of perfectionism. Fear of judgment. We believe that anything less than perfect will result in criticism or rejection from others. All or nothing thinking. We see outcomes as either complete success or total failure, with no middle ground. Identity through achievement. We believe our worth is determined by our performance, rather than our inherent value as human beings. Control through perfection. We think that if we can just do everything perfectly, we can avoid pain, disappointment, or criticism. The gradual release from perfectionism happens through what Jung called embracing the shadow of imperfection. Stage 1, recognizing the cost. You start noticing how perfectionism actually limits your life. How many opportunities have you avoided because you couldn't guarantee perfect results? How many creative projects remain unfinished because they don't meet impossible standards? Stage 2, redefining failure. This is crucial. You begin to see failure as feedback rather than as a reflection of your worth. Every mistake becomes data for improvement rather than evidence of inadequacy. Stage 3, progressive standards. Instead of demanding perfection, you start setting good enough standards that allow for completion and learning. You can always improve something once it exists. Stage 4, celebrating imperfection. This sounds paradoxical, but you begin to appreciate the beauty in imperfection. You recognize that flaws often make things more human, more relatable, more real. Stage 5, vulnerable creation. Eventually, you develop the courage to share your work, your ideas, your authentic self before they're perfect. Knowing that imperfection is where real connection happens. Jung's most profound insight about perfectionism was this. What we call perfection is often just fear wearing a sophisticated mask. The perfectionist isn't seeking excellence, they're avoiding vulnerability. True excellence comes from the courage to be imperfect in public, to learn from mistakes, to iterate and improve over time. James's transformation took 18 months. He started by setting completion goals. Instead of perfection, goals. He joined a writer's group where he had to share imperfect work weekly. The vulnerability was terrifying at first, but gradually he discovered that his flawed writing often resonated more deeply with readers than his carefully polished pieces. Today, James has published 3 novels. None of them are perfect. All of them have touched thousands of readers. He's learned that done is better than perfect, and that his imperfect books existing in the world create infinitely more value than his perfect book, existing only in his imagination. Section 10, the addiction to being busy. The 9th thing, spiritually awaken people slowly. Quit is the addiction to being busy. In our culture, busyness has become a status symbol, a badge of importance, and for many people, a way to avoid facing themselves. Jung observed something fascinating. Many people fill their lives with constant activity not because they're passionate about what they're doing, but because they're terrified of stillness. He called this productive avoidance, using busyness to escape the discomfort of self-reflection. Consider Rachel, a marketing director who wore her 60-hour work weeks like armor. Her calendar was packed from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. with meetings, projects, networking events, and side hustles. When people asked how she was doing, she'd respond with pride. Busy. So busy. Rachel's identity was entirely wrapped up in her productivity. She felt valuable when she was needed, important when she was overwhelmed, successful when she was exhausted. Rachel's awakening came during a forced sick leave when she contracted pneumonia and was bedridden for 2 weeks. For the first time in years, she couldn't be busy. And in that stillness, something terrifying emerged. She had no idea who she was when she wasn't performing productivity. The silence revealed anxiety she'd been avoiding, relationships she'd been neglecting, and dreams she'd been too busy to pursue. She realized that her busyness wasn't leading her toward her goals. It was helping her avoid confronting what those goals actually were. Jung understood that constant busyness often serves several psychological functions. Identity through productivity. We feel valuable only when we're producing, achieving, or crossing items off our to-do lists. Anxiety management. Busy minds don't have time to worry about existential questions or uncomfortable emotions. Social validation. In our culture, being busy signals importance and success to others, avoiding deep questions. Constant activity prevents us from asking challenging questions about meaning, purpose, and what we actually want from life. The gradual release from busyness addiction happens through what Jung called the discipline of strategic stillness. Stage 1, recognizing the pattern. You start noticing that you feel uncomfortable or anxious when you're not busy. You might realize you check your phone compulsively or fill every free moment with activity. Stage 2, questioning the stories. You examine the beliefs underneath your busyness. Do you believe that productivity equals worth? That stillness is laziness? That your value comes from being needed? Stage 3, experimenting with emptiness. This is terrifying for busy people. You start creating small pockets of unscheduled time and notice what comes up. Maybe it's 10 minutes of sitting without your phone, or taking a walk without a podcast. Stage 4, distinguishing productive from busy. You learn the difference between meaningful activity and busy work. You start asking, is this actually moving me toward something important? Or am I just staying busy? Stage 5, strategic engagement. Eventually, you develop the ability to choose your activities consciously rather than reactively. You become busy with purpose rather than busy for its own sake. Jung's most profound observation about busyness was this: what we resist persists. The things we're trying to avoid through constant activity, loneliness, anxiety, existential questions, difficult emotions, don't disappear just because we ignore them. They accumulate in our unconscious and eventually demand attention, often through physical symptoms, relationship crises, or what we call burnout. The release from busyness addiction is gradual because stillness can feel genuinely threatening to people who have used activity to manage their psychological state for years. The emotions, thoughts, and realizations that emerge in stillness might have been avoided for good reasons. Jung understood that we need to develop the psychological capacity to be with ourselves before we can choose to be still. Rachel's transformation took almost 2 years. She started by scheduling nothing time into her calendar, literally blocking out periods for no specific activity. This felt rebellious and uncomfortable at first. Gradually, she discovered that her most creative insights and important life decisions came not from her busy periods but from her still ones. Today, Rachel works fewer hours but accomplishes more meaningful work. She's learned to distinguish between being productive and being busy. And she's discovered that her worth doesn't depend on her constant activity. Section 11. gossip, and negative conversations. The 10th thing spiritually awakened people slowly quit is gossip and habitually negative conversations. Jung understood that what we consistently talk about literally shapes our reality, and spending our mental energy on other people's business is a form of spiritual poverty. Here's a question that might make you uncomfortable. What percentage of your conversations yesterday were spent talking about other people rather than ideas, growth, or meaningful topics? If you're honest, you might be surprised by the answer. Jung observed that gossip serves several psychological functions, but none of them support our actual development as human beings. Let me tell you about Sandra, an office manager who had become the unofficial hub of workplace gossip. People came to her desk not for work-related issues, but to share the latest drama about who was dating whom, who might get fired, who was having marital problems. Sandra felt important being the person in the know. She had information others didn't, and people sought her out for the latest updates. But Sandra's awakening came during a particularly toxic period, when the gossip mill she'd helped maintain destroyed a colleague's reputation based on rumors that turned out to be completely false. Watching someone she actually liked suffer because of conversations she'd participated in forced Sandra to confront an uncomfortable truth. Gossip wasn't harmless social bonding. It was a form of psychological violence that corroded trust, damaged relationships, and poisoned the entire workplace atmosphere. Jung wrote about what he called shadow projection, the psychological tendency to focus on others' flaws rather than examining our own. He understood that people who habitually engage in gossip are often unconsciously trying to feel better about themselves by diminishing others. Jung identified several psychological patterns underneath habitual gossip. Deflection from self-examination, talking about others' problems helps us avoid looking at our own. Illusion of connection, sharing secrets or negative information, can create a false sense of intimacy with others. Status through information. Having exclusive information about others can feel like power or importance. Avoiding vulnerable topics. It's safer to talk about others' relationships than to examine our own. Safer to criticize others' choices than to question our own. The gradual release from gossip and negativity happens through what Jung called conversational consciousness. Stage 1, awareness of patterns. You start noticing how much of your conversation centers on other people's business rather than meaningful topics. You might be shocked by this recognition. Stage 2, understanding the function. You explore what gossip does for you psychologically. Does it help you feel connected, important, superior, less alone? Stage 3, redirecting energy. When conversations turn toward gossip, you start experimenting with redirection. I wonder what we could learn from that situation. Or speaking of challenges I've been working on. Stage 4, choosing your conversations. You become more selective about who you spend time with and what topics you engage with. You start gravitating toward people who inspire rather than drain you. Stage 5, elevating discourse. Eventually, you develop the ability to guide conversations toward growth, ideas, creativity, and meaningful connection rather than judgment and negativity. Jung distinguished between gossip and legitimate concern or processing. Sometimes we need to talk through interpersonal challenges with trusted friends. The difference is in the intention. Are we seeking understanding and growth, or are we feeding on drama and judgment? The release from gossip is gradual because it often fulfills real social needs, the need for connection, the need to feel important, the need to process social dynamics. We can't simply stop gossiping without finding healthier ways to meet these underlying needs. Sandra's transformation took about 18 months. She started by implementing a personal rule. Before sharing information about someone else, she would ask herself, is this person asking for help? Is this information mine to share? Will sharing this create more understanding or more judgment? Gradually, Sandra discovered that when she stopped participating in gossip, her relationships deepened. People began trusting her with more meaningful conversations because they knew she wouldn't broadcast their personal business. Today, Sandra's desk is still a gathering place, but now people come to her for advice, encouragement, and genuine connection rather than the latest drama. She's become known as someone who lifts others up rather than tears them down. Section 12. The need for constant stimulation. The 11th thing spiritually awakened people slowly quit is the need for constant stimulation. Jung predicted this phenomenon decades before smartphones existed. He understood that people would increasingly struggle with what he called the anxiety of emptiness. Here's an experiment. Try sitting in a room for 10 minutes without your phone, without music, without any external stimulation. Just sit with yourself and your thoughts. If you find this difficult or anxiety-provoking, you're experiencing what Jung identified as one of the greatest barriers to self-knowledge. Let me share Alex's story. Alex was a software developer who couldn't handle silence. He woke up to podcasts, worked with music, ate lunch while watching videos, exercised to audiobooks, and fell asleep to Netflix. Every moment of his day was filled with external input. Alex's awakening came during a camping trip when his phone died and he was left alone with his thoughts for the first time in years. The initial anxiety was overwhelming. His mind felt chaotic, uncomfortable, almost unbearable without its usual distractions. But something interesting happened on the second day. In the silence, Alex began hearing his own thoughts clearly for the first time. He realized he had ideas, insights, and creative solutions that had been drowned out by constant stimulation. He also discovered emotions he'd been avoiding and dreams he'd been too distracted to pursue. Jung wrote extensively about the importance of what he called active imagination, the ability to engage with our own inner world without external prompting. He understood that constant stimulation prevents us from developing this crucial capacity. Jung identified several reasons why people become addicted to stimulation. Avoiding uncomfortable emotions. External stimulation helps us avoid feeling anxiety, loneliness, sadness, or other difficult emotions. Fear of boredom. Many people have developed an unconscious belief that boredom is dangerous or intolerable. Identity through consumption. We define ourselves by what we consume. Podcasts, shows, music, content, rather than what we create or think. FOMO, fear of missing out. Constant connectivity creates anxiety that something important might be happening without our knowledge. The gradual release from stimulation addiction happens through what Jung called befriending the void. Stage 1, recognition of dependency. You start noticing how uncomfortable you feel without external input. You might realize you automatically reach for your phone in any quiet moment. Stage 2, small experiments with silence. You begin creating tiny pockets of unstimulated time. Maybe it's drinking your morning coffee without reading anything, or taking a short walk without podcasts. Stage 3, sitting with discomfort. This is challenging. You learn to tolerate the anxiety that arises in silence without immediately seeking distraction. Stage 4, discovering internal richness. Gradually, you begin to notice that your own mind is actually quite interesting when it's not competing with external input. Stage 5, selective consumption. Eventually, you develop the ability to choose your stimulation consciously rather than consuming it compulsively. Jung's most profound observation about stimulation addiction was this: we can't know ourselves if we're never alone with ourselves. Self-knowledge requires the ability to sit with our own thoughts, feelings, and inner experiences without external distraction. The irony is that people who can't handle silence often feel lonely even in crowded, stimulating environments because they've never learned to enjoy their own company. The release from stimulation. Addiction is gradual because silence can reveal things we've been unconsciously avoiding: difficult emotions, unresolved conflicts, existential questions, creative impulses that require us to take risks. Jung understood that we need to develop the psychological capacity to be with ourselves before we can choose to be unstimulated. Alex's transformation took about a year. He started with 5-minute meditation periods and gradually built his tolerance for silence. Today, he begins each day with 30 minutes of unstimulated time, and he credits this practice with his most important life decisions and creative breakthroughs. I thought I needed constant input to be creative, Alex says, but I discovered that creativity requires space, not stimulation. Section 13, Rigid Beliefs and Mental Inflexibility. The 12th and final thing that spiritually awakened people slowly quit is rigid beliefs and mental inflexibility. Jung understood that the moment we become completely certain about anything, we stop learning, growing, and evolving. Here's a question that might challenge you. What if your strongest beliefs are actually your greatest limitations? What if the things you're most certain about are preventing you from discovering deeper truths? Jung wrote, "The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge." He understood that mental rigidity, regardless of whether our beliefs are correct, prevents us from the ongoing growth that spiritual awakening requires. Let me tell you about Margaret, a university professor who had spent decades building expertise in her field. She had strong opinions about education, politics, relationships, and spirituality, and she could defend these positions with impressive intellectual rigor. Margaret's awakening came when she was invited to teach in a developing country where her Western assumptions about education were completely challenged. Students who couldn't afford textbooks were displaying deeper wisdom than her privileged university students. Teaching methods she'd dismissed as primitive were actually producing more engaged and creative thinkers. For the first time in years, Margaret found herself saying, "I don't know," and meaning it. This was initially humiliating for someone who had built her identity on expertise, but gradually it became liberating. Jung distinguished between what he called dead beliefs and living beliefs. Dead beliefs are those we hold rigidly, without question, often as defense against uncertainty. Living beliefs are those we hold lightly, remaining open to modification as we encounter new experience and information. Jung identified several psychological functions that rigid beliefs serve. Identity security. Our beliefs often become so intertwined with our sense of self that questioning them feels like self-annihilation. Anxiety management. Certainty feels safer than uncertainty, even when our certainties limit our growth. Social belonging. Shared rigid beliefs can create strong group identity and belonging. Superiority and control. Being right about important issues can make us feel superior to those who disagree. The gradual release from mental rigidity happens through what Jung called intellectual humility. Stage 1. Recognizing rigidity. You start noticing when you're defending positions rather than exploring ideas. You might realize that you haven't changed your mind about important topics in years. Stage 2. Cultivating curiosity. Instead of immediately defending your position when challenged, you experiment with genuine curiosity. What might I be missing? What could I learn from this opposing view? Stage 3. Embracing I don't know. This is terrifying for people who have built their identity on having answers. You start acknowledging the limits of your knowledge without feeling threatened. Stage 4. Seeking disconfirming evidence. Advanced practitioners actively look for information that challenges their beliefs, understanding that this is how growth happens. Stage 5. Holding paradox. Eventually, you develop the capacity to hold seemingly contradictory truths simultaneously, understanding that reality is often more complex than our mental categories. Jung wasn't advocating for wishy-washy relativism or the absence of convictions. He distinguished between healthy conviction, which remains open to new information, and unhealthy rigidity, which resists any challenge to established beliefs. Awakened individuals can hold strong values and opinions while remaining intellectually humble about the possibility that they might be wrong or incomplete. Jung's most profound insight about beliefs was this: what we believe shapes what we perceive, and what we perceive shapes what we believe. Rigid beliefs create self-reinforcing loops that prevent us from seeing evidence that doesn't fit our existing frameworks. Mental flexibility isn't about having no beliefs. It's about holding our beliefs lightly enough that they can evolve as we do. The release from mental rigidity is perhaps the most gradual of all these transformations, because our beliefs are often deeply connected to our survival strategies, our social connections, and our core identity. Changing fundamental beliefs can feel like psychological death, which is why it happens slowly in layers, as we develop the capacity to tolerate uncertainty and identity fluidity. Margaret's transformation took several years. She gradually developed what she calls confident uncertainty, the ability to hold strong opinions while remaining genuinely open to being wrong. Today, Margaret is known as one of the most innovative educators in her field, precisely because she's willing to question assumptions that others take for granted. As we reach the end of our exploration, I want you to understand something crucial. This isn't a checklist to rush through or a scorecard to judge yourself against. These 12 things that spiritually awakened people slowly quit represent a journey that can take decades. And that's exactly as it should be. Jung understood that authentic spiritual awakening isn't about perfection. It's about progression. It's not about eliminating these patterns completely, but about developing the awareness to recognize them and the wisdom to choose differently when it serves our growth. Let's briefly review what we've explored. 1. The need for external validation, learning to approve of yourself. 2. The illusion of control, surrendering to life's natural flow. 3. Toxic relationships and people-pleasing, honoring your authentic needs. 4. Material pursuit for happiness, finding fulfillment from within. 5. Living in past or future, inhabiting the present moment. 6. The need to be right, valuing connection over correctness. 7. Comparison and competition, embracing your unique path. 8. Perfectionism and fear of failure, accepting your human imperfection. 9. The addiction to busyness, creating space for stillness and reflection. 10. Gossip and negativity, elevating your conversations and energy. 11. Constant stimulation, befriending silence and your inner world. 12. Rigid beliefs, maintaining intellectual humility and flexibility. Here's what I want you to understand. You don't need to work on all 12 areas simultaneously. In fact, Jung would warn against that approach. Instead, notice which 1 or 2 areas resonate most strongly with you right now. That's where your psyche is ready to grow. Start small. If external validation is your challenge, practice 1 authentic choice this week. If busyness is your pattern, schedule 1 hour of unstructured time. If perfectionism holds you back, complete and share 1 imperfect project. Jung's greatest insight was that spiritual awakening isn't a destination. It's a process of becoming increasingly conscious of who we are beneath our conditioning, our fears, and our ego structures. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, presence over distraction, connection over correctness, you're participating in what Jung called individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are. I'm curious, which of these 12 areas spoke most deeply to you? What's 1 small step you could take this week toward releasing what no longer serves you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your insights might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And remember, this journey is easier when we don't walk it alone. If this content resonated with you, consider subscribing and joining our community of individuals committed to conscious growth. Together we can support each other in becoming who we're truly meant to be. Jung once wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." The 12 things we've explored today are all external patterns, ways we've learned to look outside ourselves for what can only be found within. The gradual release of these patterns isn't about deprivation or loss. It's about making space for your authentic self to emerge. This is your invitation to begin that gentle, gradual, transformative process of letting go of what you think you need in order to discover what you actually are. The journey continues, and you're exactly where you need to be. If this video added value to your journey, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might benefit. Subscribe for more content on psychology, spirituality, and conscious living. And remember, the goal isn't to quit these 12 things overnight. The goal is to become increasingly aware of them and increasingly free to choose differently. Until next time, be patient with your journey. Be kind to yourself in the process, and trust that every step toward authenticity is a step toward freedom. Thank you for joining me on this exploration. I'll see you in the next video.